The quiet farmlands of Lucan, Ontario hold a dark and bloody secret. A story so brutal, so steeped in violence and recrimination, that its echoes are said to linger over a century later. This is the story of the Black Donnellys, a name that once struck terror into the hearts of their neighbors, and a name that today is synonymous with one of Canada's most infamous massacres. Were they a family of ruthless criminals, a plague on the peaceful township of Biddulph? Or were they victims of prejudice and persecution? A convenient scapegoat for a community's simmering resentments? For decades, the answer has been debated, clouded by sensationalism and local legend. But there's another layer to this tragic tale. A layer that whispers of ghostly apparitions, phantom horsemen, and a lingering presence that refuses to fade. Many believe the spirits of the murdered Donnellys still roam these lands, seeking justice or perhaps revenge. But are these tales of the paranormal credible? Or are they just the simple, final embellishing chapter in a story that has been told and retold, each time with a little more color and a little more fear? Before they became a Canadian legend, before the feuds, the fires, and the final brutal massacre, the story of the Donnelly family began in a place of even greater conflict, County Tipperary, Ireland. This isn't just an origin story, it's the genesis of a tragedy. The violence that followed them across the Atlantic wasn't random. It was a cultural inheritance, forged in a society where justice was often found not in a courtroom, but at the end of a gun. To understand the Donnellys, you first have to understand Tipperary in the 1830s and 40s. It was a powder keg. The land was controlled by an Anglo-Irish landlord class, leaving the majority of the Catholic population in a state of precarious tenancy and widespread poverty. This wasn't just a tough time, it was a system of oppression. Landlords used practices like rack renting, charging exorbitantly high rents, and enclosures, shifting land use away from farming to grazing. This meant that small tenant farmers were pushed off their land, concentrating hardship and fueling deep-seated resentment. With the legal system seen as just an instrument of their oppressors, the people of Tipperary created their own form of justice. Secret, oath-bound societies with names like the White Boys and Ribbon Men emerged. These were the law of the night, practicing what was called midnight legislation. Their tactics included tearing down fences and targeting rent collectors to defend land rights. The local population maintained a code of silence, looking with indifference upon the most atrocious acts of violence, and by screening the criminal, abet and encouraging the crimes. This created a culture where violence wasn't just common, it was a normalized way to resolve disputes. Enter James Donnelly, a working-class coach driver and the rebellious son of dispossessed peasants, and Joanna McGee, the daughter of an influential estate manager. An estate manager was a figure of authority, responsible for enforcing the landlord's will and dealing with agrarian agitators. Joanna's family was part of the system that was oppressing James's people. Their love was a direct transgression. When they married in the late 1840s, they had to elope because of Joanna's father. He didn't agree with this match and was extremely angry. This wasn't just a family feud, it was a perceived betrayal of the class and his authority. The consequences were swift and brutal. Joanna's father and his men pursued James with extreme prejudice, putting a sizable price on Jim's head. The threat was so severe that James actually had to flee Ireland alone in 1842, leaving behind Joanna and their infant son. On screen now is James Donnelly Jr.'s face. He was the son. That picture is him when he's older. Obviously, there are no photos of any of the family members from their childhood. I mean, photographs were only taken in special occasions like weddings, or becoming a government body, or in death, or court. Anyways, this was an urgent, life-saving escape from either arrest or assassination. But it wouldn't be for 2 long years before Joanna, demonstrating incredible resilience, joined him in Canada in 1844. This strength would later resurface when she fought for her husband's life in Canada. They brought with them more than just their family. They carried the psychological and cultural baggage of Tipperary. They had learned 3 critical lessons that would profoundly shape their new lives: a deep distrust of formal authority, the normalization of violence, and a reliance on factionalism. In the 1840s, James and Joanna Donnelly, fleeing the hardships of their native Ireland, arrived in Canada with their young family. They settled in the town of Biddulph, a predominantly Irish settlement community near the town of Lucan, Ontario. The Donnellys were a fiercely independent and notoriously stubborn clan. James, the patriarch, was a man with a quick temper and a strong sense of his own rights. Joanna, his wife, was equally formidable, known for her sharp tongue and unwavering loyalty to her family. Together they raised 7 sons and 1 daughter, a brood that would become their strength and their downfall. The feud started with land. The family built their home on a lot owned by an absentee landlord by the name of John Grace. When the land was sold, the Donnellys, who had put years of labor into the property, fought to stay. They succeeded when James Sr. bought the northern half of Lot 18 for a deeply discounted price in 1856, a direct result of his improvements on the land. But his victory came at a horrific cost. In 1855, James Sr. was charged with shooting at a neighbor, Patrick Farrell. 2 years later, during a logging bee, James Sr. killed Farrell with a handspike. Although James Sr. was just defending himself allegedly after Farrell allegedly attacked him with a handspike as well. The damage was done. James Sr. turned himself in and was sentenced to hang. By the way, this is what a handspike looks like. It was Joanna who saved him. She organized a petition that led to the sentence being commuted to 7 years in Kingston Penitentiary. During his absence, she took out mortgages, but managed to keep the family on their contested land. The patriarch returned in 1865, but the core narrative was now set. The Donnellys were a family of violent defiance, surviving— what the fuck that doesn't make any sense. The Donnellys were a family of violent— okay. The patriarch returned in 1865, but the core narrative was now set. The Donnellys were a family of violent defiance, surviving through their own stubborn will. To smoothly transition into the next stage of the video, I need to go back a few before the handspike incident and tell you that James Sr. had 7 sons. James Jr., who was born in Tipperary, John, who was born in 1847, Patrick in 49, Michael in 1850, Robert in 53, Thomas in 54. Oh, and since it's going to be relatively unlikely that Jenny's going to come up in the story, this is Jenny. She was born like a year later, but unimportant to the story. Sort of. As the boys came of age, the feud shifted from farm to the road. In the 1870s, James Jr., William, Michael, Robert, and Thomas all drove for or established their own stage lines. This put them in direct economic warfare with rival lines, but this wasn't just a competition, it was a war. Stages were sabotaged, stagecoaches specifically. Stagecoaches were sabotaged, stables were burned, and the family was charged with larceny, robbery, and assault. The feuds consumed their personal lives too. William Donnelly's marriage to Nora Kennedy in 1875 angered members of her own family, including her brothers-in-law. And in 1876, a simple wedding turned into a riot. Robert Donnelly was arrested for shooting a constable. But despite the mountain of charges, the Donnellys repeatedly secured acquittals or had charges dropped altogether. The failure of the legal system to convict them, even after they assaulted constables, convinced their neighbors that the Donnellys were untouchable, well, except for Robert because he's in jail now. In 1878, Constable James Carroll began his own personal vendetta against the family, and in 1879, Father John Connolly created the Biddulph Peace Society, asking all parishioners to pledge support and agree to home searches. The Donnelly family, however, refused to sign. This public defiance solidified their position as social and religious outcasts. In August of 1879, a splinter group formed called the Vigilance Committee. This group, which met at the Cedar Swamp Schoolhouse, was an organized mob that sought to replace the official law with their own form of justice. Led by James Carroll and other neighbors, Carroll, now a constable, promised to rid the township of the Donnellys. The family was now completely surrounded. In late 1879, Michael Donnelly was stabbed to death in St. Thomas, which was a tragic sign that their violent fate was inescapable. The year 1880 began with an ominous return. Robert Donnelly was released from prison where he'd been serving time for allegedly shooting a constable. Just days later, on January 15th, Patrick Ryder's barn burned down. The Vigilance Society didn't care that 3 of the volatile sons were at a wedding that night. They immediately blamed James Sr. and Joanna. As James Donnelly Sr. complained that the Donnellys were unfairly blamed for everything, the Vigilance Society had its own final pretext. This was a calculated act. By targeting the parents, the vigilantes signaled their intent had shifted from punishing a specific crime to the systematic annihilation of the Donnelly family. The barn fire was just the perfect pretext for a collective retaliation. By the winter of 1880, the tension in Biddulph Township had reached a breaking point. On the night of February 3rd, 1880, members of the Vigilance Committee gathered at the Cedar Swamp Schoolhouse. Driven by years of legal frustration, economic envy, and the immediate pretense of the Ryder barn fire, the approximately 30 vigilantes prepared to descend on the Donnelly homestead, setting the stage for the massacre that would follow hours later. The final act of the feud was about to begin. The attack began at the main Donnelly home on Lot 18 sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Inside, 4 family members were sleeping. Patriarch James Sr., his wife Joanna, their son Thomas, and their visiting niece Bridget. 12-year-old Johnny O'Connor was also there, having been brought to the house to help with chores before the family was due in court the next day for the Ryder barn burning. Johnny O'Connor was sleeping in the front room next to James Sr. and awoke when a mob entered. When James Sr. walked into the kitchen, he saw that his son Thomas was handcuffed and asked as much. He asked, "Are you handcuffed?" Thomas replied that he was, and sarcastically commented that Carroll thinks he is smart. It's believed that at this moment, the violence had erupted. Johnny slipped under the bed in the room to the left of the kitchen door and watched as the mob descended upon, attacked, and murdered James Sr. and Joanna. Their niece Bridget had fled into the living room, and Johnny crawled from under the bed and ran with her. Bridget managed to enter the second-floor room and, in her panic and haste, closed the door behind her, shutting Johnny outside the room. At this point, Thomas managed to escape through the front door of the house, but was quickly apprehended by the mob and dragged back inside. During the time that the mob was distracted, Johnny moved back to being under the bed at the back of the house. Once the mob dragged Thomas back into the house, he was brutally beaten and subsequently killed. The mob then broke through the upstairs door and brutally beat and murdered Bridget. Once the killings were done, the mob spread coals throughout the house and set the homestead ablaze. Amid the chaos and flames, Johnny O'Connor managed to slip out the back door around 1:30 a.m., escaping to a neighbor's house. In all, on that homestead, the mob murdered 4 people. James, Joanna, Thomas, and their innocent niece Bridget, who was just visiting from Ireland. Kind of fucked up. During the fire, Bridget's lifeless body fell through to the main level, which is why you can find the crime scene mock-ups with everyone's body on the lower floor, despite Bridget having been murdered in the upper portion of the house. The night of bloodshed, it wasn't over yet. After destroying the homestead, the mob traveled approximately 2 miles north to the home of another Donnelly son, William. William, his wife Nora, and a visitor named Hogan were inside with William's brother John. The mob surrounded the house, shouting fire to lure William Donnelly outside. He was the intended target, but it was actually John Donnelly, who had just returned from a wedding, who went to the door to investigate the noise. He was allegedly mistaken for William and shot dead on the site. Meanwhile, William, Nora, and Hogan hid inside and witnessed the murder. All three survived the attack. By the morning, 5 members of the Donnelly family were dead. 6 if you include the one that was stabbed earlier. The family homestead was nothing more than a pile of burnt rubble. And while the snow fell through the night, helping to obscure the crime scene, the townsfolk looted the damn property. William Donnelly, who survived the attack at Wayland's Corners, was later listed as an informant on the death certificates for all 5 victims. The cause of death was recorded as supposed to have been murdered. Like, there's a question for it. Barbaric. After the unspeakable atrocity of February 4th of 1880, the Canadian justice system faced its greatest test. Could it deliver justice for the Black Donnellys when the entire community seemed to be complicit in their murder? The trials that followed were not just about a verdict. They were a definitive test of whether the rule of law could prevail over the rule of the mob. The official legal process began immediately with a coroner's inquest to determine the cause of death. 12-year-old Johnny O'Connor, who had survived the attack, provided a crucial eyewitness account, identifying the killers. But despite his clear testimony and the arrest of 13 men, including the ringleader James Carroll, the inquest came to a bizarre conclusion. The Donnellys had been murdered by persons unknown. This finding, so early in the process, revealed a fundamental problem. Local authorities were already unwilling to name the suspects. As the trial approached, the environment became one of open intimidation. Johnny O'Connor, the key witness, his family home had been burned down before the first trial, a deliberate act to silence him and undermine his testimony. Prosecutors desperately appealed to move the trial away from Middlesex County, knowing that the community was hostile to the Donnelly family. However, the request was denied, guaranteeing that justice would be sought in the very community that had celebrated the murders. The first trial began in October of 1880 with James Carroll charged with the murder of Joanna Donnelly. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on Johnny O'Connor's account. The judge, Justice Armour, delivered a powerful charge to the jury, urging them to put aside their biases. He warned them that reasonable doubt could not be conjured up. But despite the judge's forceful instructions, the jury could not reach a verdict after 6 hours. The vote was split, 7 for acquittal, 4 for conviction, and 1 undecided. When questioned, jurors openly admitted that they voted for the acquittal out of sheer fear for the dozens of others involved. This wasn't a failure of evidence. This was a clear case of jury intimidation and nullification. Disillusioned, Crown Attorney Charles Hutchinson publicly stated that any further attempts to get a conviction in Middlesex County would be a waste of time and money. However, Attorney General Mowat, recognizing the political importance of the case, ordered a special commission to expedite a second trial. The second trial of James Carroll began just after the first anniversary of the massacre. It lasted a little over a week, and the verdict was swift. Not guilty. Legal reports stated that the jury dismissed Johnny O'Connor's testimony because it lacked supporting, direct, or circumstantial evidence. While the verdict was legally sound, it was a societal ratification of the Vigilante Act. The jury had used its legal principle of reasonable doubt as a shield to protect the accused. The acquittal of James Carroll effectively ended all other criminal cases. The Crown, acknowledging its defeat, abandoned the prosecutions against the 5 other men committed for trial. No one was ever convicted for the murders. The justice system had been completely neutralized by a unified, hostile community. The Donnelly trial stands as a stark illustration of a historical moment where Canada's legal framework provided insufficient when confronted by the organized local violence and political hostility. The public's will, driven by fear and prejudice, had defeated the courts. It's a dark chapter in our history, unresolved and unpunished. A powerful reminder that justice is only possible when a community is willing to demand it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. This was a pretty dark topic. It's not something that we typically cover. We're mostly about debunking ghost videos and things like that, but this was requested quite a bit by my boss. He really wanted me to learn about it, and by making a video about it, I did learn a lot about it. There's a lot more information about this in between that led up to the murders and after, including what happened to the family afterwards. I've got all the information, and if you're interested in learning more about that, I could make an extended version of this. However, it's already taken me close to a month, actually a little bit more than a month actually much more than a month. It's actually been about 2 months, 2.5 months, honestly. It took me a long time, in other words, to gather up all the information, research, come to the understanding, find all the details about the family before they even came to Canada in the first place. All in, I think this video took me around 350 to 380 like active hours of watching and investigating and understanding, reading everything that it's possible to find online, and then writing the script, which, by the way, this video only contains half the script. I'm running out of time. I need this uploaded on October 31st. So my name is Nick. This has been You Don't Scare Me, deep dive into the Black Donnellys, and thank you for watching. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow or the next day with our regular content. Okay, bye.
We cracked the code, we broke the spell. Another myth debunked so well. Till next time, don't be deceived. Stay sharp, stay smart. Believe in what's believed. Truth wins out every time. Truth wins out every time.